Hello, this is my review for Texas Chainsaw 3D from 2013. Now, if you've been following my reviews in this series so far, you'll know that I'm a massive fan of the original film in this franchise, but I'm not a big fan of the sequels and follow-ups and reboots. It's been very slim pickings for me in terms of things to enjoy throughout Texas 2, 3 and so on, all the way up to this installment, which I believe is the 7th. And I wasn't expecting to enjoy this one either, because I've actually seen this one before. I saw it at the cinema when it came out in 2013. It was a very random cinema visit at the time. I wasn't particularly looking forward to seeing the film or anything. I saw it one particular Saturday night. I think there were about 9 other people in there. I didn't even see it in 3D. It was a 2D showing, and I didn't think much of the film. I thought it was kind of meh. And by the following day, I'd completely forgotten about it. So on this rewatch 8 years later, I was fully expecting to not find much in it again. And I was fully prepared to have to do another mediocre review or possibly even a negative review. So imagine my surprise, lo and behold, I actually enjoyed this on second watch all these years later. So we do have some positive things to say today. But first, a very quick synopsis for people who have not seen the film. This is a direct follow-up to the Texas Chainsaw film from 1974, the original. It takes the Halloween 2018 approach of having a sequel way into the future. We get a grey-haired Leatherface in this film. It works quite well, actually. He's basically been hiding in a relative's basement for about 30 or 40 years in this version of the timeline. And then his benefactor dies of old age, and the house gets passed on to a very distant relative of that woman, a young girl from a neighbouring town. She turns up with her friends to claim the house. They don't know that Leatherface is in there, and then the horror of the film can begin. As much as I've just said that the film is quite good, we do begin with a quite weak opening sequence, which is set right at the end of the events of the first film. So we see all these police turn up at the Sawyer residence. I'm guessing about an hour after Sally Hardesty has escaped. But there are a lot of things presented here that don't make a lot of sense. I don't get why Drayton and Leatherface have not fled the residence in the time that they had before the police turned up. Surely Drayton at least would understand that to stay at the house would be completely futile. And also, all these uncles and women have suddenly turned up since the end of the first movie. Where did they come from? The first movie clearly established that there was just the granddad, Drayton, Leatherface and the hitchhiker. So where have all these people come from? It doesn't tie into what we've already seen. And then we get the appearance of all these rednecks and people from the local communities who apparently hate the Sawyers and have just been dying for a chance to turn up in their droves and shoot them all or whatever. But this doesn't really fit into how I viewed the world of the first Texas Chainsaw. You know, one of the scary things about the original film was the fact that this family had just kind of blended into the scenery and nobody really knew they were there. They were just forgotten by society. You know, I never really got the impression that they were one of those oddball families that everybody in the surrounding areas is aware of and doesn't like. That, you know, so I don't think this film quite got that part right, or it didn't interpret the first film correctly on that score. And by having the, I'm going to call them rednecks again, by having them there, it produces this really cheesy scenario where they set the house on fire, which gives Leatherface a convenient way to escape in the confusion. How many times have we seen that in horror films, you know? People setting a building on fire, which is meant to sort of kill the antagonist in a really painful way, but actually it just gives them a cheap way to escape, which is what happens. There's only one bit I like about this whole opening sequence, which is the fact that when all the police and the rednecks are shooting at the house, one of the bullets hits Grandad in his chair and his chair flops over. It's a real kind of dismissive way to finally kill him off at about the age of 130. But I thought that little blink and you'll miss it moment was quite funny. But apart from that, they really kind of dropped the ball with the whole opening sequence. Once we get to the present day, though, the film becomes brilliant for about 45-50 minutes. I was quite surprised. And I like the fact that we're introduced to the main characters when they're still at home, before they've set off on their long journey to Texas, or maybe they're just travelling across state because they're already in Texas. I'm not sure on that one, actually. The main final girl is called Heather. She's played by Alexandra Daddario. And I didn't think I'd seen her before, but apparently she was in Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, a film which I saw at the cinema back in 2010. But I really enjoyed her performance in this. Really likable actress. I really enjoyed the character. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this is now my new favourite final girl in the whole series. Even better than Sally Hardesty, better than Jessica Biel. Just absolutely terrific performance. Her best friend is played by Tania Raymonde, who I saw recently in Deep Blue Sea 3, a very underrated shark sequel. Just throwing that out there. The two blokes that they're travelling with, I don't recognise them from Adam, and from looking at their wikis, I think one of them is actually more a singer than an actor normally, and the other guy doesn't have many credits. So I think they spent more of the budget on the female parts than the male parts. The only other actor I recognised in this is Scott Eastwood, Clint Eastwood's son, who's popped up in one or two things now and again. So these characters get about halfway to the destination and they pick up a hitchhiker. And at this point, I thought to myself, oh no, they're doing the whole Viggo Mortensen spiel from Texas 3 again. I thought we were going to get to the final act and then we'd get the whole surprise, Heather, that kind of thing. I'm just going to keep doing that joke at every opportunity now, I've just decided. No, I mean, this hitchhiker turns out to be a scumbag, but thankfully he's a scumbag who's not related to the Sawyers. So we get a little bit something different there. When the characters arrive at the mansion where Leatherface is hiding out, this is the biggest place I have seen in any of these films. It's really impressive. It's huge. It's got all this woodland between the front gate and the actual house, the secret passages inside the place. Leatherface is living down in this basement with this steel door in front of his room, which is just like the sliding steel door that is in the first film that he first pops out from. So that's a nice little nod to the original film. I just got done saying that this film has my favourite final girl in the whole franchise. It also has my favourite bad guy residence. What follows, and I'm going into spoiler territory now if that bothers you, is this amazing chase sequence where Leatherface realises that there are people in his house that don't belong, and he goes on the warpath with his chainsaw, and let me tell you, it's probably my favourite chase in the whole franchise. So that's three things now. This review has really gone places, hasn't it, since that dodgy beginning. So we've now got best final girl in the series, best house in the series, and best chase in the series. It's even better than the one where he's chasing Sally Hardesty in the original. It's so good. It's got so many different elements to it. There's this bit where Leatherface is trying to put his chainsaw down into this coffin where Heather's hiding. Love that. And then the characters get in the car and try and barge through the gate at the front of the house, but the gate barely moves 2 inches, even though the car goes into it at like 70 miles per hour. But a really expensive, big place like this, you'd expect the front gate to be steel and of really good quality. So I like the fact that the script plays it realistic at that point. Of course, Leatherface then catches up to the car and the chase is still going. And then there's this bit where Heather gets away on her own and reaches some kind of carnival. And I thought to myself, right, okay, Leatherface is going to let it go at this point. He'll slink behind a tree and then he'll try and get her later on in the film, because there's still like 30, 40 minutes to go at this point, surely. And I think a lot of the other horror icons might well have done just that. You know, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, to name but two, would have let things go at that point. They're not going to chase after their victims into a huge crowd, especially when it's not the end of the film. But Leatherface don't give a shit. Just goes straight into the carnival amongst all these like dozens of people. And I'm thinking to myself, Jesus, this is great. I mean, this is already a chase that is just completely epic. And now he's going into the carnival after Heather, and then Heather jumps on this ride, which is like a big wheel thing, and she's going high up into the air, and by this point my pulse is just racing so fast. I just think this is like completely unexpected. Did not expect this from this film. So once this chase is finally over and Leatherface does call it a day because he just can't get this girl, it just caps off an amazing 45-50 minutes, like I said, from when we're first introduced to these characters up until the end of this chase, when we're down to just one person, because Leatherface has killed the other four by this point. Brilliant. Now, the stuff that happens in the third act is not quite as good. They sort of bolt on this secondary storyline about a corrupt mayor who wants to kill Heather for various reasons, bizarrely. And I did think that the film was in danger of undoing all the good work it had done up to this point. But it just about gets away with this subplot, if you like, because we get a really satisfying death of the mayor. There have been far too many scumbags in this series who have just bugged the shit out of me and yet not got their comeuppance by the end of the film. Well, that doesn't happen this time. Leatherface cuts this mayor's hands off and drops him in a meat grinder and it's really, really cool to see. There is a little bit of an over-reliance on CGI for this death. I mean, the body parts sort of disappear from the blades a little bit too quick than if it had been sort of puppet work that had been used, but it's still really, really cool to see. I really enjoyed that kill. So I think that just about brings me to the end of my list of positives. The last thing I'll say is that the music is really good in the film. There's a really cool song that plays on the end credits. It's my favourite of all the end credits music that there's been in this series up to this point. And there's also a really funny country and western song that has F words in it that plays around about the point that they pick the hitchhiker up. So if we talk about some of the film's downsides, there are a lot of plot contrivances that don't make sense and character choices that don't seem completely right. I went through some of these actually in terms of the film's prologue. I mean, if you just enjoy this film on a base level in terms of its kills, its gore, its chases, its great final girl, etc., etc., you'll have a good time. But if you examine the film a little bit more closely, there are a lot of things which just don't really stand up. I think the biggest thing of all is the fact that Heather and Leatherface make friends at the end. I mean, this guy has butchered her friends, her boyfriend, and I know that he helps her in the slaughterhouse, but is that enough to make up for the fact that he's killed all her friends? She can just forgive him after that and they become best buddies? I'm not entirely sure that that would work like that in real life, you know. I think what should have happened is that she should have accepted his help at the slaughterhouse, and then once they got back to the mansion and she'd reflected on things a little bit, I think then she should have killed him, you know, maybe locked him in the basement forever or just killed him in some other way. I think that would have been a nice kind of final surprise, but they didn't go with that. I'm guessing they just wanted to leave it open for a possible sequel. Roll eyes. Having said that, and I probably should have put this in my positive section, but there's a really cool post-credit scene where Heather's parents turn up. Now, they're quite mean to her in the one scene that we see them sort of earlier in the film. I'm guessing that once they find out Heather's coming to money, they sort of change their tune and think they're going to be a lot nicer to her. So they turn up to the mansion and Leatherface answers the door with his chainsaw whirring, and then it just cuts to black. And I think the idea is that he's probably going to kill them, maybe. I'm not sure, actually. I mean, that could just be his way of answering the door. Maybe he just walks around the house with his chainsaw whirring. Maybe when he's making toast or making coffee, he just carries his chainsaw with it whirring away. I don't know, but I really enjoyed that last little scene. It was quite funny, actually. So I guess if Heather had killed Leatherface, as I'm suggesting she should have done, we wouldn't have got that funny scene at the end. Fair enough. Also, though, there's this really weird subplot whereby Tania Raymonde's character is sleeping with Heather's boyfriend behind her back. They even get down and dirty right there in the mansion on this journey. Now, Heather never finds out about this, and I think she should have found out about it somehow. Then she would have had reason to maybe forgive Leatherface for taking these guys out. As it is, it doesn't make much sense. So I don't know why they introduced this affair. If we'd have seen these characters actually having sex, then I could have passed it off as, okay, the script wants us to enjoy a little bit of titillation, fine. But we don't get to see them do anything, even though we know they're at it. So it's really weird that they kept this in the script. It's kind of bizarre. There's also a moment where, just after the characters have got to the mansion for the first time, they decide to go out to the shops to pick up some supplies, but the hitchhiker guy decides to stay at the mansion and to freshen up or just get some shut-eye or whatever. And none of the characters object to him staying behind at the mansion by himself. Now, if I just inherited a mansion with all this expensive stuff in there, I mean, there could be paintings in there worth millions for all Heather knows. They haven't had anything valued yet, so would you really leave a guy in there who you've only just met, who could just rob you from out of house and home? Not one character, as they're pulling out of the driveway, suggests that this might be a bad idea. It's really weird. So throughout the film, there are scattered these really odd creative choices that don't make an awful lot of sense. It starts in the prologue and just works its way through. You've really got to try and just forget about that stuff and enjoy the film for what it is. So on that note, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I have for Texas Chainsaw 3D. We've got 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5 for Texas Chainsaw 3D. That is a very good score for one of these sequels, especially when it comes to my reviews, and it's given me a little bit of my motivation back as I move on to the next film, which is Leatherface, a prequel which is also in this timeline. This might actually end up being the timeline for me when it comes to these films. I could easily see myself watching Texas Chainsaw 3D in the future, straight after I've watched the original film. I think I'll skip a lot of those other ones. The remake's not bad as well, but this one is definitely my cup of tea compared to all those other sequels and reboots, I think. So we'll see what Leatherface is like, and we've also got a 9th film coming out later this year, which I believe is yet another stab at the whole 30 or 40 years later type of sequel. Presumably that is just a completely different timeline again. But we're jumping ahead of ourselves. So that is all for my review of Texas Chainsaw 3D. I'll see you all again next time. Bye-bye.